You are listening to The Testimonial, a podcast of critical essays bearing witness to the forces that shape our world. We conduct historical autopsies, expose hidden systems, and decode the profound truths within culture, politics, and the seemingly whimsical. Each episode is a deep dive, a forensic investigation. This is the evidence. You're about to hear the testimony on the silent sex, how the great man theory erased women from history. We're essentially treating our historical records less like sacred texts and more like a crime scene. Let's get into it. So when you flip through any history book, what do you see, right? It's this grand parade of kings, conquerors, geniuses, but all that noise raises a really fundamental question. It's a question that honestly echoes through the halls of our past like a deafening silence.
You know, the convenient answer has always been, oh, women just weren't there. They were just watching from the sidelines. But that's the central lie we've all been told. The truth is so much more deliberate. See, women weren't absent from making history. They were actively removed from it. Their absence isn't some historical accident. It's a manufactured product. And in this explainer, we're going to deconstruct exactly how it was done. All right, so let's get right into it. We're going to start by looking at the intellectual blueprint for this entire project of erasure. I mean, this is the idea that for centuries gave everyone the perfect excuse for ignoring half of humanity. It's called the great man theory. So this idea, which was really pushed by a guy named Thomas Carlyle, was incredibly simple, but man, was it powerful. He basically argued that history is just the biography of a few heroic dudes leading everybody else around. But the problem is, this created a massive self-fulfilling prophecy. It basically defined history as only the stuff that happens on battlefields, in royal courts, in fancy academies. You know, the exact places women were legally and socially locked out of.
And look, this wasn't just some bad idea floating around in the air. No, this was an active architecture of exclusion. It was a whole system, built on three very specific interlocking pillars, all designed to make sure women's contributions would just vanish from the official record.
So let's break these methods down. Pillar 1, women were denied the actual tools you need to create a public legacy. Pillar 2, if they did manage to create something amazing, the credit was basically stolen. And Pillar 3, the entire world of women's work and influence, that was just labeled not history. Thrown out. Okay, let's talk about that first pillar, disenfranchisement. It all started with legal stuff like coverture. Now, under this doctrine, a married woman was basically a legal ghost. I mean, any poem she wrote, any invention she came up with, any money she earned, it all legally belonged to her husband. Her own legacy wasn't even hers to sign. And this whole legal ghost thing was backed up by locking women out of education. The big institutions that give you credibility, almost all of them were men only for most of their history. Get this, Oxford didn't grant degrees to women until 1920. Cambridge waited until 1948. Without that official stamp of approval, a woman's work could just be waved away as, a cute little hobby for an amateur. All right, pillar number 2, attribution theft. This is a big one. Even when women somehow jumped all those hurdles, their work often got credited to men anyway. The most classic example of this is the male pseudonym, right? The Bronte sisters had to publish as Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell. Marian Evans had to become George Eliot. And why? Just to get their work taken seriously. And I mean, listen to Charlotte Bronte herself. She explained this wasn't some fun little game they were playing. It was pure, desperate necessity. This quote just nails it, doesn't it? It captures the insane reality they were up against. To be seen as a serious author, you had to be seen as a man. Period. Okay, so that brings us to the final pillar. And this one is maybe the most subtle of them all. It's this creation of a totally false divide between the public male world and the private female world. History, they decided, was only what happened in public. Politics, war, big philosophy. All the work of running a household, taking care of the community, literally sustaining life itself, that was just dismissed. It was treated like this timeless, unchanging wallpaper. It just wasn't history. And here is a perfect, brilliant illustration of what happened because of that. For thousands of years, the knowledge of childbirth and healing, that belonged to midwives. But then, starting around the 17th century, male physicians started to push them out, to medicalize the whole thing. And in doing so, they either totally erased or just absorbed entire archives of female knowledge, and they did it without giving any credit. Gone. Okay, so now let's look at some actual evidence. Let's open up what the essay calls the Matriarchive. This huge, parallel record of all the female intellect and creativity that was actively pushed down. Let's see how these pillars of erasure really affected real women with real names and real stories.
Let's start with science. The classic case, of course, is Rosalind Franklin. The official story we all learned is that Watson and Crick discovered DNA's double helix. But the absolute key, the thing that unlocked it all, was Franklin's Photo 51. It was an X-ray image that was shown to Watson completely without her knowledge, without her consent, and for that, she was basically demoted to a footnote in one of the biggest discoveries of the 20th century. A footnote.
How about technology? Well, you've got Hedy Lamarr. To the world, she was this glamorous Hollywood star, right? But what they didn't see was a brilliant inventor who co-patented a frequency hopping system during World War II. The Navy kind of just shrugged it off at the time, but guess what? Her concept is the literal foundation for the tech we use every single day. Wi-Fi, GPS, Bluetooth, the whole shebang. And this happened in social movements too. We tend to focus on the amazing, charismatic male leaders, like Dr. King, but that often hides the strategic architects working behind the scenes. A woman named Ella Baker was an absolute force, a formidable organizer who pushed for a collective grassroots model. Her philosophy was the engine of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, but even so, she's often just a background figure in the popular version of the story. And get this, even the most iconic moments were sometimes, well, they were carefully curated. We all know the story of Rosa Parks. But 9 months before her famous act, a 15-year-old girl named Claudette Colvin did the exact same thing. The very same thing. But the movement leaders at the time felt that Parks, who was older and middle class, would be a more palatable symbol for the cause. So Colvin's incredible courage was deliberately pushed aside, all for tactical reasons. So here's the really crucial point. When you start seeing these patterns repeat themselves in science, in tech, in social movements, you start to realize something. This isn't just a bunch of one-off isolated accidents. The evidence, when you pile it all up, points to a deliberate project.
I mean, given how systemic this is, how deep it runs, you just have to ask, right? Was this all just one massive, centuries-long oops? A simple mistake? Did history just forget?
And the evidence just screams, no, absolutely not. This was an active, intellectual project, and its purpose? It was to build a version of the past where things like authority, genius, and power were seen as inherently, exclusively male things. And if you do that, well, then the power structures of the present start to look natural, inevitable, even. Which brings us to the final verdict here. The great man theory and the history books it wrote, well, it's not a neutral record of what happened. Not even close. It's propaganda. It's a story that power told to make itself feel legitimate. The exclusion of women wasn't some bug in the system. It was the entire point. It was the feature. So reclaiming this lost history isn't just about, adding a few names to a list. It's about totally changing how we see the past. It's about realizing that history isn't some cathedral built by a few great men, but that it's more like a living, breathing forest. To reclaim the Matriarchive is to restore the forest. To see that the story of life is not one of lonely height, but of profound interdependence. You have been listening to the testimonial on The Silenced Sex, How the Great Man Theory Erased Women from History. If you enjoyed this summary, for the full testimonial, please follow the link in the description or search for the testimonial on your favorite podcast platform.